Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I'm your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we are starting our long-awaited series on the cryptids. We're probably going to stagger these out a little bit, but these are a bunch of cryptid submissions that we asked you guys to submit to us, and we have a lot of them. And we're going to start tonight with a submission by Jules Melbourne. But before we do, if you have an effed up story of your own on the paranormal, you can get that to us at effedupstories.com. That's effedupstories.com. We'll put it on the website and we'll put it into a podcast. And with that having been said, we're going to jump into Jules Melbourne's submission. It's titled Barrens Jersey Devil on the website, by the way, if you want to read the original. So, his story, as he said it, it's not an extreme story, although I really found it interesting, but, it's the only paranormal experience that he's had in his life. And, this is despite, his vast interest in it since he was young. He grew up... much like a lot of us, and you guys listen to this podcast, you're interested into the paranormal. And I kind of relate to him in a little bit. I only have a handful of paranormal experiences, and truthfully, I'm a little bit jealous of some of the submissions we get. But anyway, at this time, he was living in southern New Jersey, and it was near an area called Barrens. And he describes the Barrens as a large reserved area near the middle of the state that's filled with pine trees and very sandy soil. The area was never very populous due to the poor quality of the soil for growing food, and so it became a literal backwoods. And he said about 5 years ago, he learned just how close, he was to this area of it, and he began going there as often as he could, which turned out to be, a couple times a year. And he said, the Pine Barrens are known for basically being strange, having all kinds of stories that come out of there, and, strange stories, of course. And this can range from, your traditional ghost stories of the 18th century to very modern myths about murderous communities of social outcasts, such as dwarves and albinos. The most well-known of these stories, of course, is the Jersey Devil. And this is a cryptid, the Jersey Devil. And the Jersey Devil is said to frequent a small bottomless lake in the Pine Barrens called the Blue Hole. And he has visited the Blue Hole. So he said every time that he would visit the Pine Barrens, he would find something strange or unsettling. And, he considered the area to be one of high strangeness. He would see, for example, extremely out of place objects and, on very secluded and deep paths, such as he's seen car parts and candy canes and clothing. We're talking about a very remote area, very remote trail in a remote area. Odd placements of animal carcasses and mass graves of animals. Footprints which began and ended abruptly and apparently are very common over there. He said the entire place has this very eerie feeling with, these tall pines that are looming over you and a silence that seems very unnatural. And he said on a trip that took place in October of 2014, his friend Harry and him, they both took this trip, and their goal was to reach the end of a particular dirt road. If it had an end, it was one that they had obviously sighted before, and they wanted to see what was at the end of it. And anyway, they started on this walk later than they expected, but they got much, much further than any of their previous attempts. He said they walked about 2 miles, and at a certain point, the dirt road widened, and they began to notice that it was getting much darker outside. At first, they kind of ignored it and pushed it to the back of their head, and all the meanwhile knowing that it meant that they would have to return on this trail in total darkness if they pressed on. And they continued to walk the path for perhaps another 20 minutes after noticing it getting darker. And at this point, it was in the later stages of dusk. And he said just ahead, the path narrowed again, making a dark tunnel, which they marched toward without giving a second thought. And as they got within 10 feet of that change, they heard the strangest noise that they have ever heard come directly from, the woods. And it came to the right, from the right. And he said it sounded like a combination of a yawn and a scream, but it was both feminine and very loud, but not entirely human. He said it was as if whatever made the noise was some sort of hybrid, or attempting to mimic a human through some strange means. He said the sounds were layered and distorted in a way that neither Harry or himself can replicate. They have no idea how to, he has trouble articulating what the sound was like, but needless to say, it was very foreign to them. And he said, without any hesitation, the both of them turned and ran, for several hundred feet back the way that they had come. And he said by this time it was very dark, and in their mad rush, they managed to grab the flashlight out of one of their backpacks, and they half jogged the remainder of the way, occasionally shining the flashlight behind them just to ensure that they weren't being followed. And he said, after this event had taken place, they didn't really speak about the event after that, simply because they didn't really have a lot to talk about. But they both shared an interest in the paranormal since they were young kids, and they actually became, friends through this mutual interest. So, they just weren't willing to forget what had happened or to leave it a complete mystery. And, he's done some research on it since. He's looked up a list of animals native to the area and found sound files of their calls and noises, and none of them has come close to anything like what they heard out there. And he said they've taken several trips since then, and they found out that nothing existed in the direction from where that noise came from for many, many miles. So it's unlikely that they were heading, or hearing some strange echo of people from a village or community or town, unless there were people walking in the middle of nowhere in pitch black, and even then, again, it didn't really sound normal. So, and he sent this in on July 23rd, 2015, and he said several months ago, prior to this, to July, he again brought up the event to his friend Harry because they're planning on going back there, and it was then that Harry told him that he had read about bizarre screaming similar to what they had heard on that night, And apparently that is a trademark of the Jersey Devil, which goes back to its original cases. And, Jules never made a decision on, what he thinks it was that they heard, but, he's just at a loss of what he thinks it is. And if you actually go and Google the Jersey Devil, you will see the Pine Barrens pop up as I think the most common place for the Jersey Devil. I could have swore I saw that just by chance the other day. So obviously it was something, and it sounds like the sound that they heard is described as similar to the Jersey Devil. So what's your thoughts on that, Ryan?
Well, I mean, the Jersey Devil is, one of the greatest, most iconic of the cryptid creatures. It's kind of mixed up into legend and cryptozoology and monsters and even religion and witchcraft. I think one of the earliest stories that I ever came across, many years ago. I'm sure you can hear my cat howling in the background.
I can.
Yeah. Was about this woman who lived out in the woods with her husband, and she had she at this point she had like 12 children for this man, and she was so sick and tired of being pregnant and raising these children. He was like a hunter and trapper and fisherman. So he was gone all the time, and she was left there with a soccer team worth of children. And then she became pregnant a 13th time. And this was just
I know this story.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were. And I can't say I blame her. 13 pregnancies. Wow.
That got to be some damaging on the vagina.
That's a well-used uterus. So I believe the whole story is attributed to the Leeds family, Leeds, and she stated that with this 13th pregnancy that she cursed it, or said it would be the devil. And this is during the 1700s. The Jersey Devil goes back a long ways. And, she gives birth on a dark and stormy night. And, the child is born normal, but then, changes into this misshapen creature, or sometimes in the stories say it was born deformed, and then grew into this goat-headed creature with hooves and bat wings and a forked tail, and it growled and screamed, and then flies out the chimney, and flies around the nearby villages, and then out, disappears into the Pine Barrens, so it's a very quintessential tale, and the idea that in this time and this age, in the 1700s, if somebody did give birth to some kind of a greatly deformed child, and I mean you just go and look, there are some pretty crazy deformities out there,
like the Chernobyl babies.
There's the quote, what do they call them? The reptile babies. They have some kind of skin condition, and they look all scaly, and sometimes even like kind of greenish in color.
Still,
so there's
having hooves and a tail and a
and a goat's head, and
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a little more than
it is, but I mean, I'm sure I could find. I know there's all kinds of deformities of the hands and feet where the digits on the hands and the feet are fused together,
like the crab people.
Exactly. And I mean, the crab people, you could almost say that's like a hoof, right? But regardless,
Do you
I don't
know?
think there's any. I don't think there's any deformities that include wings and a goat head
And flying out of the chimney.
and flying out of the chimney shortly after being born. You know, it's an interesting tale, and it's one that leads itself to witchcraft and the paranormal. But I like personally, I believe that there's something in the Pine Barrens. There's just too many sightings and too many stories. It's one of those things where at this point there's too much in existence about it for it to not be real. There's a thread of truth that goes back there.
Well, there's a lot of stories, especially for somewhere so remote. Like it's not a place where a lot of people go, and yet there's a history of stories that come out of there. So it almost seems like a great deal of the people that go there experience something. So, I mean, that would lead credence. By the way, you know how a lot of stories are like this, but they make this big deal. Like, it happens on a dark and stormy night. And I don't know if there's anything to that, but do you know that I was born on a dark and stormy night? I really. Well,
3 a.m. too, the witching hour.
No way. Listen to this.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the truth now.
I was literally born for this stuff.
Oh, me too. Well, get this. I don't know if I ever told you this. Mom told me this.
You had wings and hooves when you were born,
and I flew through a chimney. No, but I actually was born in a really small town, Portabass. I'm sure you've heard of it. Nobody else whoever hears this podcast will have heard of it. But anyway, it was like really early in the morning. It was, I'd say, around 2:30 when Mom knew that she was about to give birth or whatever. And of course, it was dark and stormy. It was thunder and lightning out. And anyway, they had only just started building a new hospital there. And first of all, their car never worked, so they had one of my dad's friends had a truck or something like that. Way
to be on top of things, Dad.
Yeah, it's actually kind of fitting with him. But anyway, so I get this. He calls his friend. He brings down the truck. They're racing in the storm to the hospital, which, by the way, isn't entirely done yet. I mean, they're still painting it and stuff like that, but they're kind of open, but not fully finished. And I get in there, Mom gets in there, and anyway, apparently they never had the proper room set up, so she had to go into a different room, and the power went out and all kinds of stuff. And I was literally born at 3:16 a.m. Right, so I'm like you. I've pretty much been marked for this stuff.
The another witching hour, baby.
And get this.
One of the interesting things that years and years later, of course, I first heard of the Jersey Devil. I mean, that's it, right? It's like ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, Nessie, and then Jersey Devil. That's your, that's how you stumble into all of this stuff when you're younger. And the Jersey Devil, of course, being somewhat of an outlier. You can kind of somewhat get behind ghosts. All right, people from other planets, UFOs, aliens, a large unknown hominid in the woods, Bigfoot, some unknown water dwelling creature, Nessie. But then along comes this amalgamation of parts, right? And you have the forked tail, that's devil stuff. The goat, devil stuff. Bat wings, devil stuff. It was this perfect amalgamation, this perfect chimera of devilish parts. And it's funny, decades later, and meaning not that long ago, probably 7-8 years ago now, I came across this very interesting theory about the Jersey Devil. And it was a post made on an internet forum somewhere, of people discussing reptilians. And there's this of course, once you really get into the whole reptilian thing, there's supposedly a caste system, and the highest level of the reptilian caste being the sometimes I guess they're referred to as the royals or the dracos or something like that. And they're supposed to the royal reptilian caste supposedly has wings. And this post was talking about it, and this guy was talking about some kind of an abandoned mine or abandoned military bunker or something to that effect, that he was kind of snooping around, and had run into what locals refer to as the Jersey Devil. But to him, in his mind, he thought that this has to be a reptilian. It had a somewhat of an elongated face. It had wings and clawed hands and feet. And he postulated that perhaps it was a reptilian, or maybe some reptilian outcast that has been hanging around since the 1700s in this area, and people keep spot them every now and then. And at this point now, there's an image. You just Google Jersey Devil and you'll see that quintessential image of this strange, kind of equine headed being with wings, kind of reared up on its hind legs, with its forked tail hanging down below. That's the image of the Jersey Devil today. But I thought it when it comes to these kinds of topics, I think we need to be willing to shift our view one way or the other. When we're finally if somebody was looking for the Jersey Devil and then all of a sudden ran into a reptilian, well, geez, that's a hell of a coincidence. What's the chances? And if this guy's story was indeed true, and I mean, let's face it, 99.9% of the people who have quote unquote encountered the Jersey Devil probably have not been mired into the paranormal conspiratorial world to such a degree where they have descriptions of a whole laundry list of cryptids and aliens and paranormal creatures. So I think that possibly there's space in there for a misrepresented extraterrestrial being.
And you never know, if the Jersey Devil could procreate with itself, perhaps its babies are deformed too. Right? So.
Or maybe it doesn't have to procreate with itself. I mean, Missing 411 has definitely established that there's a veritable laundry list of missing people in strange circumstances all over North America.
You think they got turned into Jersey Devils?
Played mother to a host of Jersey Devils.
Okay. Well, that's a scary world.
Well, I mean, I think if we've established anything over all the years of doing this, I mean, you and I would assume most of our listeners know that I'm a big geek for science. I love the paranormal, UFOs, all that stuff. But, I actually got into that because of my love of science, my desire to understand the world around us. And as my studies of the known became more and more complete, I was forced to move into other areas, studies of the unknown. I mean, we call that parapsychology or cryptozoology, or
and the known knowns and their
ufology.
The known unknowns and the unknown knowns and the unknown
What
unknowns.
was that? A Dick Cheney speech?
I think it was Donald Rumsfeld.
We have known knowns. We have unknown knowns. We have known unknowns.
Oh man, the first time I seen that, I was like in a clip show, and like that it seemed so out of place when it came on. It was fucking hilarious.
The absurdity of the entire.
I mean, it made
Bush
sense, but it was just, you're listening
I
to
can't believe this guy's saying this with a straight face.
But anyway, so that, like you said, the Jersey Devil is an iconic cryptid. It's almost like Nessie, right? Everybody's heard of the Jersey Devil. Everybody might not know all the details, but I'm sure they've heard the name, right? And another good point that you said was that, a lot of these witness accounts come from people who, they're not paranormal buffs. They're people that are out for a walk, although...
a hiker.
Yeah, exactly, right? So they're not going to know the description. I mean, I don't even know it, really. If I'd have to go Google it right now to remember all the different parts that you just listed off, that is, that makes up the Jersey Devil. So for some...
I wouldn't, you see. I wouldn't. I would know the Jersey Devil. I'd see that thing and be like, folks, that's the fucking Jersey Devil.
Yeah, but you got like one of those eidetic memories or something like that.
Only for paranormal stuff.
I'm like a goldfish. I just keep coming around, and it's like, oh, that's my house again. Oh, that's my house. Oh, right. But I mean, you look at like, I could picture lots of cryptids, but the Jersey Devil is made up of like lots of weird things. You got the forked tail, you got the hooves, you got the horse face, you got the. Hey, I'm doing pretty good. But
the only one you missed was the wings.
The wings, right? So for the person who's not into this stuff, they're not into the paranormal. They're not really. They don't have a profile to line this up with. They're gonna come out. They're not saying I saw the Jersey Devil. They're saying I saw this thing and it had a horse face and it had wings and hooves and
you know what we need to do? We need to create a real world Tobin spirit guide.
I would love to do that. Ghostbusters was like my favorite thing when I was a kid.
This is your class 8 spectral disturbance.
And yeah, and here's Slimer, and yeah, they're making a reboot of that, hey?
I'm not interested.
Yeah, me either, because I was interested when it was those guys. I can't really picture it without Bill Murray and Ramis and what's his name?
I believe Ramis is dead now, hey?
He is. Ray, what's Ray's actor's name again? I should know this. I got documentaries where he talks about UFOs. And he made that vodka, or he bought that vodka, the crystal head vodka or something like that. Damn it, why can I not remember this?
Dan Aykroyd.
Dan Aykroyd. Right. I just can't picture it without...
Of course, there's the one, probably the most important, Peter Venkman. I mean...
Well, that's Bill Murray.
Yeah, of course.
How could you have the Ghostbusters with those guys?
Right. Yeah.
And Winston, I can never. I don't know. I never seen him in any other movie, but Anyway, so I can't remember what I was talking about, but that is the Pine Barrens.
Yeah, sorry, I derailed you a little bit there. So I mean, for anybody interested, definitely go and Google the Blue Hole. Check it out on a map. I mean, it is. It is definitely off the beaten trail.
Oh, if you think the blue
area, and I always find this interesting. It's I guess a point worth noting that a lot of the times, and people scoff at this, right? But a lot of the times, you get these kind of cryptozoological creatures in these barren regions. It's like, oh well, I seen that in the Pine Barrens. I seen it in the Badlands. I seen that in the rock flats.
Well, where would you hide as a cryptid?
Well, that's just it. When human beings popped on the scene 200,000 years ago, the first thing we did was move into all the grade A real estate, and people forget, but at that time when we were first kicking around, there was more than just Homo sapiens sapiens on the block. There was Neanderthals, there was Homo australis, there was Gigantopithecus, there were just a laundry list. What was it, Homo florensis, the Hobbit man. There literally were hobbits when people first were first on the scenes. So there was a whole, again, I use this word a ton of times now, but there was literally a laundry list of other kind of people who walked upright and probably had language and some form of culture and probably used tools. We can't imagine that now, but that was the case at one point, 200,000 years ago, or 100, probably up until 10 or 12, 15,000 years ago when the Neanderthals all died out. But at some point, there were other people like critters on this planet that weren't human. And we lived alongside of them for more of our history than we've been without them. And now we're at a point where in the far off dark corners of this world that we inhabit, that we've spread out into and civilized, in these dark corners of the world exist mysteries, strange sightings, little people, big people, hairy people. And it really leads one to wonder, is it just the human imagination, or are they holdovers from an earlier time?
Well, and the other thing to look at, especially for modern cases today, where people, see this stuff, and is it their imagination? Is it their, creative imagination? And I don't think so, because movies aren't that creative today. So to summarize, Jersey Devil, iconic, and there's all kinds of creatures. They tend to go into these, isolated areas to escape us. And if you want to Google some really freaky stuff, of course, you can Google the Pine Barrens Blue Hole. Or
visit it.
Or if you're really brave.
Here's a, what was that, 300-year-old mystery now?
Yeah, and if you're really brave, you can Google the Brown Hole.
I would suggest doing an image search on that.
No, I recommend it. But
I think the Blue Hole and it's
I don't know, that might be scarier if you Google. You might find a Smurf in there and a pretty
or a list of Grey's Anatomy. I mean the actual medical book, not the TV show.
Okay. Well, anyway. So that's the Jersey Devil. We're going to be doing some more cryptid podcasts. Like I said, we're probably going to stagger them. But if you guys have an effed up story of your own, you can get that to us at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. We'll get it on the website and into a podcast. And with that said, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Have a great night.
Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Pender.
And I'm your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we are starting our long-awaited series on the cryptids. We're probably going to stagger these out a little bit, but these are a bunch of cryptid submissions that we asked you guys to submit to us, and we have a lot of them. And we're going to start tonight with a submission by Jules Melbourne. But before we do, if you have an effed up story of your own on the paranormal, you can get that to us at effedupstories.com. That's effedupstories.com. We'll put it on the website and we'll put it into a podcast. And with that having been said, we're going to jump into Jules Melbourne's submission. It's titled Barrens Jersey Devil on the website, by the way, if you want to read the original. So, his story, as he said it, it's not an extreme story, although I really found it interesting, but, it's the only paranormal experience that he's had in his life. And, this is despite, like, his vast interest in it since he was young. He grew up much like a lot of us, and you guys listen to this podcast, you're interested into the paranormal. And I kind of relate to him in a little bit. I only have a handful of paranormal experiences, and truthfully, I'm a little bit jealous of some of the submissions we get. But anyway, at this time, he was living in southern New Jersey, and it was near an area called Barrens. And he describes the Barrens as a large reserved area near the middle of the state that's filled with pine trees and very sandy soil. The area was never very populous due to the poor quality of the soil for growing food, and so it became a literal backwoods. And he said about 5 years ago, he learned just how close, he was to this area of it, and he began going there as often as he could, which turned out to be, a couple times a year. And he said, like, the Pine Barrens are known for basically being strange, having all kinds of stories that come out of there, and, Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host,